Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi, long time coming music YouTuber here. Apologies for not getting this video out earlier. I recorded it once before, but I forgot this little buddy right here, the pop protector. So you heard every time I pronounced a word with the letter P in it, or I think B, or many consonants really. It was a struggle. But we're back with some comeuppance, something for genre January. Because as you can probably tell, it's April by the time of you at least watching this. It's March 29th of me recording this. And I'm very behind. But this is sort of my apology for missing that. And you know, I was going to cover, I guess my original plan was a little bit more than what I'm doing today. But I don't want to cover it any further because if you guys remember correctly, 2 years ago for Genre January, I covered Crunkcore. That was terrible, utterly awful. Not a single redeemable album that I even looked at, except for I guess Millionaires and 303 was kind of fun. And last year I did Drain Gang. That was my own personal choice that I was excited for. And this year we're covering nu metal. Now, nu metal has been making a bit of a resurgence. This past year and a half or so, I see everyone who's into Korn now. Everyone's into Linkin Park. That people have been into Linkin Park for a really long time. Deftones, huge right now. I could go on and on about this, but basically, this is a time for nu metal to come back. And, you know, I was kind of a part of this wave a little bit. I was like, you know what? I'm sure there's a lot of great nu metal out there. And there is. Unfortunately, we're not talking about only great nu metal in this short little 4 video series here. But I will be trying to emphasize the great ones a lot more than the terrible ones. The terrible ones have a lot of trends that are similar to each other. The great ones are all kind of unique in their own field, and they all get copied by a lesser band. For example, Disturbed sort of tries to be Korn mixed with like Limp Bizkit's guitar. No one can really find that normal mix of nu metal qualities except for the bands that clearly do it. There are some deeper cuts out there that exist, but unfortunately those aren't really on this chart that much. And I'm not particularly motivated to check them out. Before I get anything started here, I want to give a quick shout out to Jen. Jen is the artist for the thumbnails for these videos. I literally crashed their place because I got back into town and because I needed just a place to stay. And I was like, Jen, do you want to make me a thumbnail? And Jen's like, yeah, I love nu metal. Now, Jen loves nu metal and Jen will show up. Well, their opinions will show up in this series. I just got to pull them up at some point and I'll provide them on the last episode with some extra recommendations of actually great albums. But for now, let's get into what is actually a part of this chart because it's some very clear nu metal essentials, some bands that are essential, but not their essential album necessarily, or their nu metal album really. There's some stuff on here that's just sort of connected to nu metal bands, and there's some deep cuts here that really should be replaced by other things. And one thing I should mention, there are a few albums on here that the bands concerned should have had a different album mentioned. It's just the wrong pick of that band. You'll see that quite a few times, and whether or not it's for the status of actually being nu metal or for its quality as an album, its placement of some of these albums is a little interesting and odd. But I'm wasting time. Let's get into the actual content of this chart, and I'll show you what's good and what's honestly terrible. Because first, we start off with Head PE, that is parenthesis HED, sometimes the E is upside down, and then P.E, meaning Head Planet Earth, with their album Blackout. And we start with an L. Now, the instrumentals here are just weird. They don't work well with each other. Maybe in some other context they'd be fine, but they're just conflicting at all times. This makes me feel like 311 drank more gin. It is certainly a little bit ska, like sort of reggae, like tinged, but like the sound isn't really there as much. And the guy here raps, but he's got sort of a post-grunge growl to the end of it. As you can probably tell, this is not a good combination so far. There are some decent vocalizations. There are some decent usage of a turntable, but for the most part, this is a cringe album. The songs Blackout and Getaway are okay, but I can't say much else. But really, one of the biggest problems on this thing is the rapping is just never good, even once, and you could skip this thing. It's a pour. But no one's surprised. And immediately taking a left turn, Korn, self-titled, an album you not only want to talk about, but just should talk about. This is one of the best metal albums of all time. Definitely one of the best nu metal albums of all time. It is a contender for the best nu metal album of all time. If you're talking in strictly nu metal and not much else, this is probably where it's at. For those of you that don't know Korn, you want to start with this album. It is a very personal, very percussive sort of funk groove metal thing that is so interesting and so personal. It's one of the most visceral albums of the chart and of the genre. It is very personal, and it's a lot of lyrics about Jonathan Davis's actual life. He's the vocalist of Korn. And as visceral as metal normally is, and as percussive as metal normally is, here it is extremely percussive and extremely visceral. You will have singing that sounds like totally skewed and like it doesn't fit in with the instrumental, and yet it somehow does fit in with the instrumental. And Fieldy's bass tone, that airy, super clicky tone, is something really, really interesting. I used to hate it, but now I kind of love it. I don't know how many contexts it would work in, but for here, it's certainly something to behold. The guitars are super dissonant. Literally everything here is just to get you moving and angsty and upset. And the lyrics are insanely upsetting. They concern abuse and drug use and death. A whole lot of drug use, actually. This album's like half about drug use. Even a song with lyrics that might not seem like they hit on the surface, like Chutes and Ladders, ends up hitting just because it sounds so good as it's executed. There are a lot of themes of like a lost childhood going on here, and the themes of drug use actually kind of tie in really well with that. But I could literally go on and on and on about Korn's self-titled, but why don't you just go listen to this and punch some walls yourself, because it genuinely will give you that feeling. And up next is Godhead's 2,000 Years of Human Error. This is a side project of one of the Marilyn Manson members. It's not good. It's like industrial metal, nu metal. You're going to see this a lot. Basically, there are a bunch of bands that try to copy Static X in a way. Coal Chamber's the most successful at doing that, in my opinion, but even they don't do it that well, and you'll see that later. But this band, Godhead, they kind of fumble the bag here. It's a lot more industrial metal than nu metal, but it's got sort of the nu metal attitude. And by attitude, I just kind of mean cringe. You know, I could forgive a lot of this if there was not a cover of Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles here that was supremely terrible. And, you know, the biggest crime of this whole album is that just everything is never really above average. It's a remarkably boring industrial metal album. It's a remarkably boring nu metal album. It's a remarkably boring waste of your time. So it's poor. And up next is Dry Kill Logic with The Darker Side of Nonsense. Now, if you take nu metal and metalcore, you'd think, do they go together? And they kind of do, to be perfectly honest with you. If you think of the percussive gentiness that goes into metalcore as a genre with the breakdowns, you'd think nu metal has its own breakdowns as well. That's probably just alt metal plus breakdowns kind of equals nu metal, except you have the percussiveness of breakdowns and spread it throughout the whole thing. So this album is very percussive. It's very entertaining as well. You're not going to be bored listening to this thing. But in terms of quality, it is a bit mixed. It's very much Korn worship. There are a lot of turntables, though, which does help it deviate from Korn. Asphalt and Weight are bangers, but overall, the sort of weird System of a Down plus Korn turntablism combination here is not always hitting the mark. Like, it is occasionally cringe. Like, the vocals are specifically very metalcore-esque with a little bit of post-grunge, and that's not exactly something I want to hear. But, you know, you're not really wasting your time that much if you listen to this one. I give it an okay, but you probably will find a bit more enjoyment out of this than I did. And up next is Mudvayne with LD50, the band that does Dig. For me, this might be the most disappointing album on the chart, if not the second most disappointing. Actually, a lot of these are really disappointing, so that's really not a valid statement, because this album's still decent, I'll say right now, but it's very progressive. It's like a prog metal album with the guise of nu metal. There's certainly edginess to it, a lot of allusions to the music industry and drug usage. It's like a very like rock and roll themed album, and except it's like got like themes of like science and DNA, and everybody knows the bass tone. So the bass for this album is fretless, which is not that common in nu metal. It's not unheard of, but it's got a whole lot of character, and unfortunately the bass is the best part of this whole album. The guitar is particularly weak sounding, like very like a little thin, not a lot of punch to it, when it's really just playing on like the bottom two strings for like 80% of this album. And, the vocalist of Mudvayne is pretty decent. He can sing better than a lot of nu metal vocalists. He can rap, scream sort of better than the rest. He doesn't really rap as much as he screams. Kind of Corey Taylor inspired, I guess. So I guess if you had to call them a copy of another band, I guess the closest thing you could pick is Slipknot, but it's really not that close to it. It's sort of a dated 2000s album, but it's not really a terrible one. But at the same time, it does suffer from actually being a bit boring because it has more of these melodic and longer sections that do try to do something pretty interesting, but it's really mixed at the end of the day. So I will give it an okay, though. There are bangers here, like Dig. There are a few songs like that are bangers, but it's not that consistent. And then when I was mentioning LD50 being one of the more disappointing albums on here, I guess that wasn't really true, because this next one is Alien Ant Farm's Anthology. The cover of Smooth Criminal's on here, and I was kind of looking forward to it, and it's a fun track. It's not an amazing cover, but it's certainly fun. This is a bit Deftones influenced, but it's got a lot of like post-grunge and even emo here. This is one of the whiniest albums on this whole chart. The vocals do have some occasional terrible moments, though. Like on tracks like Flesh and Bone, they underperform on every sense. The instrumentals are not much better than decent for most of the time, with occasionally a little bit of an emo tinge to them, but that doesn't give me any extra punch for nu metal. That doesn't make me like feel any more energy. It's clear that they tried, but I don't know how much actual passion was here. There's a whole lot of just teen angst lyrics that are like 10 years after they should have been used by this band. It's so whiny, and that's the biggest issue. This thing is just abrasive to listen to because I don't want to listen to this guy whine the whole time. It's poor. And this next album, speaking of disappointing, except it's actually a pleasant surprise because I expected this to be the worst album on the chart, and it wasn't even close. Crazy Town, The Gift of Game. This was a band that was booed off the stage at Ozfest when apparently other nu metal bands were there. This is not even close to the worst nu metal band. There are nu metal bands that still exist today, Disturbed, that are infinitely worse than this. Before I continue, though, this is not a great band by any means. And you probably know this band for the song Butterfly. That song is actually kind of terrible. I find it grating. I find it very annoying. I find the smoothness to be completely misplaced and not resonating with me at all. I just don't think it makes any sense. Meanwhile, you have like super thick sludge metal guitar tones, caveman riffs, mind you, like really easy riffs, but they go kind of hard at points, like on the song Toxic, which is like the opening track. It's just super aggressive, like you're throwing elbows at freshmen in there. It's kind of fun, and you're gonna piss people off if you play Crazy Town because no one wants to listen to Crazy Town, but at the same time that has a sort of ironic benefit to it. Of all the bands to be ironically into anymore, Limp Bizkit has really passed that into just you can be into them because you're allowed to be into them because they're good, and we'll get into that later, cuties. But Crazy Town is not that terrible. That being said, like the rapping is like never good. It's a little annoying, a little whiny, but it's not 311. It's still poor though. Up next is Drowning Pool, Sinner, covering a lot of ground today, which I'm happy to say. I wish I wasn't talking about this album though. Absolute asinine performances on every front of this album. Production is underwhelming, to say the least. Vocals just suck. They just suck. I think harsh vocals here are okay at points, but like I've never liked the song Bodies, and when I was younger I was like, oh, maybe I'll give metal a try. This was long before I liked any kind of metal, and I heard Bodies and I'm like, what do people like about this? And then the song like got into the screaming part and then the guitar, and I was like, oh, what's the appeal here? I mean, it's just lacking. It's just the riffs don't do anything for this. Bass, who cares? Drums, nothing. The guitar solos, let me tell you, if any artist has ever used this much wah pedal in their life, they should be put in jail. The riffs, for the most part, are basically just your dime a dozen, like, B-side Pantera riffs. And if you love Pantera, then maybe you'd like some Drowning Pool riffs, but, like, why would you care that much? The song Sermon is so laughably bad and pseudo-intellectual that I gotta tell you guys about it so you guys can know my pain. And I hope you guys can listen to it and see how bad it is yourself. It's like overly edgy, like atheist ranting. That's like, dude, if God real, why no GF? And it's like, cause you're a loser. Yeah, this is terrible. This is actually probably the worst album on the chart so far. Sinner by Drowning Pool, because it claims to actually be smart. Crazy Town never once said they were smart or acted like they were smart. They simply were there to have fun. And that I can get behind all the way, even if you make a bad album. But don't ever claim to be smart. Don't ever claim to be smart again. If I see Drowning Pool, it's on sight. And you know, I said that was the worst, but up next is Godsmack Self-Titled. Bros, we are so back. We are so back with Godsmack Self-Titled. Let me tell you guys a little story. There's a dating app that's been making the rounds right now, and I'm no stranger to dating apps. I've used more than you ought to be honest with you. And one of them I used is Turn Up. It's a silly name, not the worst dating app name. But it's entirely based around your Spotify. So it like analyzes the whole thing, puts in your favorite songs, albums, charts, and you have like little quizzes you can put in there. And I put some of those up, and I was like, here's some sludge metal for all you babies out there, for all my shotties. If you like acid bath, you know, come be my shotty or something like that. But cringe aside, let's get to the actual cringe. A striking amount of girls on that app have Godsmack and they're like top artists. And Godsmack's most popular album is their self-titled album. And I listened to it, and there is not a single reason that this should be in your most listened to artists. Their live album is titled Live and Inspired, which is something I was doing some research on for Rate Your Music purposes. This band has nothing inspired on their studio records. So what are you elaborating on necessarily for the live scene? And I saw it was just a Metallica cover. But there's never been an album that has been more of an affront to God, an album that has more evidence of Satan being in our midst than Godsmack. This thing is literally more evil than any war metal album you could ever play, because it is simply so absurdly bad. This is the worst drumming on the chart by far, and it's not just like, oh, it's not the drummer from Deftones who has really cool tom fills that are actually really subtle. And it's not just like it's a drummer for any other band who keeps the beat exactly what it needs to be. No, he plays less than that. His beats are insanely simple. It's cruel how simple they are. I could play better drums than this man, and I can barely even keep rhythm. It's nu metal guitar over post-grunge, and the post-grunge parts are terrible. Every song is completely vapid, completely devoid of any ideas, any fun, anything you would actually enjoy as a human being. There's no nu metal percussiveness either. You can't even like this band if you like another nu metal band. Like, what do you like, Drowning Pool? So you want like a third of the heaviness? What do you like, Korn? So you want like all edge and no bite? Oh, one song here is different though, called Time Bomb. It just throws in post-industrial, but it's produced like you gave a 6-year-old your Ableton account and he's just like pressing buttons. Yeah, this thing is poor. Don't even give these guys your money. Like, they don't deserve it. Anyone ever is more inspired than the members of Godsmack. However this thing got released is baffling to me, because this was before MySpace, so it had to be released through an actual label, made into actual copies with an actual risk. It wasn't like they made 50 vinyl copies and forgot about it. It's not some black metal demo where you can make those kind of risks. They made probably hundreds of copies, and people actually bought them. If you bought them, tell me why. Please tell me why below. I want to know why you bought Godsmack Self-Titled. And if you told me it was as a joke or a prank, I would understand. But even then, giving Godsmack money and encouraging this behavior further, I don't like as much. Anywho, let's close out today with an album that actually matters. Maybe not to you, but it does to me. This is Il Nino with Revolucion. And this thing has some Spanish-style guitar on it. Every song here, so aggressive, except for the little interlude bits. The rapping is like decent. Think like Chino Marino style rapping. This thing is as good as normal nu metal gets. It's super bouncy, and it's a tiny bit emo when the clean vocals come through, but they actually kind of work because this guy's not a terrible singer. It does have a bit of a metalcore edge with some bite and some tangibility. It's actually really, really catchy. There are some really cool, interesting Mexican instrumentals here, which I think is really cool. This band does have a little bit of Linkin Park in their blood for sure. And the song Liar is just insane. But yeah, this thing is great, and I'm really glad to have found a second album today that I actually enjoy. But don't worry, this thing will get worse and more of a slog very soon. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the thumbnail. Thank you once again to my good friend Jen. If you guys enjoyed this video, I appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Comments, questions, concerns down below. Follow my Instagram. Subscribe to this channel. Please, we're so back. But yes, please subscribe. My Twitter's in the description down below. Jen's Instagram, definitely follow Jen. Super good art. And my Discord in the description. Follow that as well. And that is about it. So I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.